Well, here in France, Kenyan President William Ruto was amongst the world leaders attending the G7 summit, which wrapped up on Wednesday. He was invited by France in place of South Africa, which was no longer welcome after tensions deepened with the United States. Now, Ruto used the platform to call for a reset in Africa's wider global diplomatic and economic ties. Bastien Renouil breaks it down for us.
If Kenya is invited to this G7 summit in France, it's because Presidents Ruto and Macron developed a close relationship during the past few years. That's why the Africa-France summit was organized here in Nairobi a month ago. You know, Kenya's President William Ruto is trying to advocate for a greater recognition of Africa by international institutions. And a French president says that he is supporting this effort. That's why the two men are advocating for a permanent seat at the UN Security Council for Africa, and that's also why they are advocating for a reform of international financial institutions so that it could benefit Africa more. You know, during a speech at the G7 summit, Kenya's President William Ruto said that most of the time African countries have to borrow at a very high cost to develop their infrastructures, and that it's very difficult for them to move forward. He said that there is a misconception of the reality of the continent by international institutions such as the IMF and the World Bank. He said that investing in Africa is not that risky and that it can actually benefit investors. And it seems that members of the G7 agree with that. They signed a declaration saying that there is a need for reform, but what will happen next? That's the question. You know, in the past, a few years ago, members of the G7 already said that Africa should not export raw materials anymore, that these materials should be transformed on the continent so that they would have more value when they are exported to other countries. But so far, very few companies have turned these declarations into act. So what will happen after this new declaration? I guess we'll have the answer in a few years.